Now, some people might notice that I don't talk about William Lane Craig around here a lot, and that's not because I can't refute his absurd arguments. Those are ridiculously simple. It's because I find William Lane Craig to be a laughable moron, completely deluded and out of his ever-loving gourd. He's an irrational apologist who just proves how far the religious go to be comforted in their silly beliefs. If this guy is the best Christians can come up with, I am not at all impressed. So let's see William Lane Craig demonstrate his utter irrationality, and while defeating him is so simple that even a child can do it. You know, I really love the energetic music he uses in his opening, declaring that he has a reasonable faith, when I think that anyone who has listened to anything William Lane Craig has said knows that he has exactly the opposite. He, just like apologists like Ken Ham, have declared that they will never, ever, ever change their minds, no matter how much evidence there is against them, because they believe for emotional, not intellectual reasons. So let's see what a load of cockamamie nonsense Craig has for us now.
Okay. And I might add as well, I've got other arguments.
Not good arguments, of course, just arguments. Of course, as I've said before, you can't use arguments to define reality. You can't argue something into existence. For that, you need evidence, something Craig simply does not have.
Right, I've got other arguments like the moral argument,
which has been soundly defeated.
The argument from the applicability of mathematics to the physical world,
which is nonsense on its face.
The Leibnizian cosmological argument,
which is absolutely pathetic, just like all cosmological arguments.
The ontological argument,
and that's complete and total bunk.
So there's a lot more than what was on display here this evening.
Not that will impress any rational skeptic, there isn't. And that's really where Craig and other apologists fail. They make their arguments to appeal to people who already believe their religious nonsense. They have nothing that will convince a non-believer to become a believer. And that's an important distinction. Their arguments are meant to reassure those who already believe that their beliefs are well-founded. They are not meant to prove to non-believers the veracity of the things that the religious believe.
Do you think he's answered? Well, very, very briefly, because there are others who want to ask. But
okay. So yes, you have many arguments, and yeah, to fall back on. If you were going at, like, supposing that you had a defeat of the Holy Spirit witness, that some natural explanation, for example, then how far would you go on faith alone?
Okay, now see, you're still asking your psychological questions.
How far should you go on faith alone?
I think that given that the Holy Spirit does bear witness to the truth of the Christian faith, you should go all the way with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. How about you prove that Holy Spirit is real? Because we're right back to Craig waving his arms around and pretending that he has anything worth talking about. How does he know that the Holy Spirit is real and actually does anything? He can't get from blind faith to demonstrable reality at all.
Alvin Plantinga talks about an intrinsic defeater of defeaters. If you have a defeater of a belief that you hold, in order for you to continue to rationally hold to that belief, you need a defeater of the defeater. Is that clear? If you hold to a belief and somebody brings a defeater against it, to continue to believe that rationally, you need a defeater of the defeater.
And that would be great if you actually had such a thing. But your defeater of the defeater isn't anything you can demonstrate is real. It's really just an extension of the blind faith that you put forward initially. So let's watch him screw this up.
But what Alvin Plantinga points out is that some beliefs may be so powerfully warranted that they are intrinsic defeaters.
not warranted, fanatically held on blind faith. Because ultimately what he's doing here is claiming that this imaginary friend of his exists, and when people challenge that unsupported claim, his defeater is that God exists. He's just restating his initial claim as a defeater against any rational challenge of his claim. That's not how this works.
That is to say, the warrant for the belief itself is so powerful, it intrinsically defeats any defeaters brought against it.
Yet you can't prove that at all. You're using the strength of your own irrational convictions to ignore any challenge brought against your blind faith, as though your own convictions somehow mean anything to anyone. All he's doing is sticking his fingers in his ears and screaming, la 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 la, I can't hear you.
And he gives the example of a person who is accused of a crime that he didn't commit, and that he knows he didn't commit, but against whom all the evidence lies, so that a jury of his peers, going simply on the basis of the evidence, ought to convict him, because all the evidence is against him.
And that's how evidence works. See, a rational person, or in this case a jury, follows the evidence to a conclusion. It doesn't, as religion does, start with the conclusion that they'd really like to be true, and then work backwards to backfill in evidence so it looks like they got to their conclusion rationally. But that's exactly what Craig and apologists like him are doing every single day. So yes, if all the evidence is truly against him, the jury ought to find him guilty.
And Plantinga says, if that happens, am I obligated to believe that I did commit the crime after all?
Obligated? No. But if the case against you is so airtight that there's no question at all that you were guilty, maybe you need to start questioning your own memory. We know false memories are real. We know that the human mind can manufacture memories of things that never happened at all to wall off uncomfortable realities. At least it's something that you have to consider, assuming that the evidence is overwhelmingly against you.
Well, he said, obviously not. My knowledge of my own innocence is an intrinsic defeater of the evidence that has made it look as though I have committed the crime.
Not to a jury of your peers it isn't, because no matter how much you extol your own innocence, if the jury is convinced of your guilt, you're going to prison. And this is really a place where we have to say that your words mean very little. You could be insane. You could be delusional. You could have memory problems. The evidence means a lot more to anyone than what you have to say. That's why personal testimony in the courtroom is much less convincing than hard evidence.
And in the same way, I would say, in my view, now this is my view, I would say that the witness of the Holy Spirit is an intrinsic defeater, so that even in the face of unanswered objections, a person is rational and should continue to believe in the Christian faith.
This is just a delusional fool clinging desperately to their delusion in the face of clear and undeniable evidence that their delusion is false. He's like the wacko on the street corner, standing on his soapbox, demanding that Zippo the space alien is real, and rejecting any arguments against him because he's personally convinced that Zippo the space alien is real. You can't argue against that person's belief because the belief is not held rationally in the first place.
And I think this gives tremendous encouragement and hope to persecuted brethren who are living, for example, in communist countries like the former Soviet Union or North Korea, who have no access to apologetic materials or books, or people in Islamic countries that are persecuted, have no access to Christian materials. These people manage to have a rational faith simply because the Holy Spirit so powerfully warrants to them the truth of the Christian faith that it intrinsically defeats the defeaters that Marxist propagandists and Muslim clerics bring against them.
Honestly, you can use this exact same argument for any position at all, including Muslims who are living under bad conditions or people in political regimes that don't recognize their faith. So long as they cling to their beliefs, they can reject any arguments against them by simply sticking their fingers in their ears and pretending that they're right all along. But that doesn't actually prove that they're right. It just proves that they're fanatics. William Lane Craig thinks he hears voices in his head, which speaks to his sanity or lack thereof. Then he pretends that because he thinks he hears voices in his head, everything he believes is real. And you wonder why I don't take this guy seriously, because he has no rational credibility at all. In fact, he's a really good example of why the religious are completely out of their gourds. They use their emotionally held delusions to justify their emotionally held delusions. That's not a mentally healthy way of dealing with reality. But as we all know, they don't want to live in reality. They want to live in their little emotional fantasy lands, just like Craig does. So that's why I rarely even look at things that he says, because he's clearly out of his mind. But if this is the best that Christians can do, I feel even sorrier for them now than I did before, because William Lane Craig is an idiot.